Hello guys, this is your friend Narutofix and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Kaguya chose Naruto as her hobby, part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel Narutofix11 for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. In the early days of my life, happiness seemed like a foreign concept, an elusive dream that hovered just out of reach. I found myself trapped in a world where choice was absent, where freedom felt like a distant whisper, and each morning greeted me with the same munda. Nay routine. The notion of waking up with a sense of excitement or anticipation was foreign to me, a stark contrast to what one might expect from a life enveloped in the trappings of royalty. You would think that being a prince would mean a constant existence of luxury and joy, but the reality was street-rickingly different. During those years, my daily existence was dictated by expectations and responsibilities that had been laid out long before I took my first breath. I often joked with friends, urging them to reconsider their outrageous beliefs about my life, suggesting they stop indulging in whatever substances might be warping their perceptions. My life was a cycle of monotony, a predictable sequence of events that left little room for spontaneity or personal fulfillment. It reached a point where I found myself suffocated by the humdrum of it all, leading me to seek a temporary escape from the confines of my routine. One fateful day, overwhelmed by boredom, I decided to venture outside to gaze at the vast sky above, hoping that a change of scenery could somehow lift the weight on my shoulders. As I gazed at the heavens, I witnessed a shooting star streak across the night, a dazzling sight that ignited a spark of hope within me. In a moment of youthful whimsy, I made a wish, an earnest plea for true love, something I had always yearned for but never anticipated would come my way. To my astonishment, fate had a way of surprising those who dared to wish. The dazzling light I mistook for a star was not a celestial phenomenon, it was a woman, a strikingly beautiful woman with silvery hair that shimmered like moonlight. Her body was graceful, yet what truly captivated my attention was the peculiar extra eye nestled in the center of her forehead. The uniqueness of her appearance only added to the air of mystery that surrounded her. When I first laid eyes on her, I was utterly spellbound. The moment she approached me, I found myself at a loss for words, overwhelmed by an unexplainable connection that seemed to transcend reality. Even as she leaned in and pressed her lips against mine, catching me completely off guard, I embraced the kiss with an enthusiasm I had not anticipated. It was a moment that would forever alter the course of my life. As our paths intertwined, I learned her name, Kaguya Otsutsuki. With each conversation, I unraveled the story of her life and her extraordinary family, captivated by the depth of her experiences and the strength of her character. My heart, once locked away in a cage of boredom, began to swell with affection and admiration. As time unfolded, our bond deepened, and we eventually married, a union that transformed my existence in ways I could never have imagined. Upon marrying Kaguya, I stepped into my father's shoes, taking on the role of emperor of a modest territory. While the throne had its challenges, it was the love I shared with my wife that kept my spirit alive. Without her presence, the starkness of royal duties would have been unbearable, yet with her by my side, even the most mundane moments became infused with joy and meaning. Our shared journey was the light that illuminated the shadows of my past, reminding me that even the most unexpected encounters can lead to profound happiness. The situation took a shocking turn when I realized that a neighboring kingdom had opted to invade mine. The most surprising part was that this was an empire with which we had shared a deep friendship for generations. As children, I had spent countless hours playing with the current emperor, who had once been my closest companion. Our bond had been strong, forged in the innocence of childhood. However, that bond was now strained, as Kaguya, my steadfast ally, sensed a shift in intentions from my former friend. ND felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. She could not fathom the notion that someone I once cherished wished for my downfall, so she insisted that I accompany her to a tree that held significant importance. Initially, I thought Kaguya's intention was simply to distract me from the escalating tensions between our two territories. I believed she wanted to help me forget the grim reality of impending conflict. However, her destination turned out to be much more profound than I had anticipated. We arrived at a colossal tree, unlike anything I had seen before. Its sheer size was awe-inspiring, towering majestically over the landscape. Kaguya, with a swift movement, picked up a rock and hurled it toward a piece of fruit dangling from one of the high branches. The fruit fell gracefully to the ground. With a determined look, she explained that this fruit possessed the power to grant us extraordinary strength, enough to put an end to the senseless war that threatened our lives and our future. Kaguya firmly believed that by consuming this fruit, we would be able to overcome our adversaries and secure a long-lasting peace, allowing us to live together harmoniously for many more years. Eager to embrace this chance, I took a half of the fruit, while she consumed the other half. The moment I bit into it, an unexpected surge coursed through my body. It felt as if my eyes were aflame, a burning sensation that made me feel as though they were being forcibly drawn from their sockets. The heat spread quickly, engulfing my entire being, and my blood seemed to boil within me. When I regained consciousness, I found my head resting comfortably in Kaguya's lap. Her expression was one of warmth and reassurance as she beamed down at me. She informed me that we were now ready to confront the conflict head-on and bring it to a definitive conclusion. Together, we executed a plan that would take our enemies by surprise. We ensnared them in an eternal illusion. This illusion was designed to grant those caught within it their most fervent wishes, the secret longings they would never dare to share with anyone else. With my former friend trapped in this realm of dreams and desires, the power dynamics shifted dramatically. I found myself ascending to a role comparable to that of an emperor, a position that had never been part of my aspirations. Yet, at that moment, I realized that this newfound authority paled in comparison to the life-changing news I had just received from Kaguya. My wife was expecting a child, and soon I would be stepping into a far more demanding and rewarding role, that of a father. This revelation filled my heart with immeasurable joy and anticipation, overshadowing any ambitions of ruling a kingdom. In that moment, I understood what truly mattered: love, family, and the future we would build together. My children were, without a doubt, one of my greatest joys in life. Hagoromo and Hamura held a special place in my heart as my beloved twin sons. Their existence filled my days with light, and I took immense pride in witnessing their growth and the remarkable things they accomplished. The energy that fueled their abilities, a gift bestowed upon us from that mystical piece of fruit, seemed to flourish within them, granting them strength and vitality that was both awe-inspiring and heartwarming to observe. Our lives together were steeped in happiness, and as the years passed, we watched with pride as our children blossomed into adulthood. However, it was during this transition that an unforeseen and tragic turn of events unfolded. A fierce rivalry ignited between my sons, fueled by their desires to be my rightful successor. Hagoromo, being the elder, firmly asserted that the mantle of leadership should rightfully be his. On the other hand, Hamura was resolute in his opposition and would not succumb to his brother's claim without a fight. In this moment of familial discord, I found myself reflecting on the unique energy that my wife had referred to as chakra. I possessed more experience in harnessing its power, but I also knew deep down that my wife would never condone any form of harm coming to our children. Yet, upon discovering the origins of this energy from that enchanted fruit, an insidious greed began to seep into the minds of my beloved boys. It was a transformation that I had always hoped to prevent, but the allure of power turned their hearts against each other. Desperate to halt this destructive path and ensure that my sons did not engage in a regrettable conflict, I felt compelled to return to the source of our gift, the tree. With my ability to communicate with plants, I approached the tree in hopes of finding solace and wisdom. However, when I turned back, my heart sank at the sight of my sons attacking their mother, demanding her guidance to reveal the location of the tree. The horror of witnessing them turning against the very person who had nurtured and cared for them was unbearable. In that moment of anguish, I shouted for them to stop, to not harm their own mother. It was an appeal driven by love, but in response, the connection I had with the tree deepened profoundly, so much so that I became one with it. This transformation was my only means of shielding the sacred tree from the insatiable desires of my own children. As I merged with the tree, I felt the agonizing sensation of my body being torn apart, an experience that transcended any physical pain I had ever known. My form expanded to an enormous size, and as I glanced back at myself, I saw the 10 tails sprouting from my rear, a reflection of the immense power I had harnessed. The battle that ensued between me and my sons was a sight wrought with devastation, a struggle more horrifying than anything I had ever envisioned. The pain coursing through me was unimaginable, compounded by the heart-wrenching knowledge that my beloved children were caught in a spiral of ambition that threatened to tear our family apart. The most unbearable moment came when I witnessed them seal their mother away in a massive sphere of rock, an eternity of floating isolation above our world. The anguish of seeing my wife trapped in such a nightmarish fate was more than I could bear. Amidst this conflict, the fabric of our family was unraveling, and the weight of our choices loomed heavily over us all. I fought against them with every ounce of strength and conviction I possessed. My hope was that if I could defeat them, they would ultimately release their mother and come to understand that their ambitions were not only misguided but also harmful. This was my plan, the vision I had held onto through the darkest moments. However, Hagoromo took an unforeseen turn. He wielded his own tremendous powers and, in a shocking move, he cut me into 9 pieces. To be severed by the hands of your own eldest son is a sorrow that transcends words, a pain far greater than my wife could ever have imagined. As the seal was being completed, an overwhelming sense of despair consumed me as I caught a glimpse of my wife. She cried with a heart-wrenching anguish that seemed like oil flowing from her eyes. It was an image seared into my memory as the last thing I would ever witness. How could I have anticipated that the very boys we nurtured and raised, the children we loved so deeply, would turn against us in such a devastating manner? Time lost all meaning as I succumbed to a state of sleep, lingering in a void where neither light nor time existed. I don't know how long I remained in this state, or if it even mattered. Everything felt indistinct. Darkness, coldness, and sadness became the fabric of my existence. Yet, amid this bleakness, something began to change. I could sense a light beginning to pierce the endless darkness, and inexplicably, I felt an invisible force pushing me towards it. Suddenly, I found myself gasping for air, the sensation of life rushing back in. However, it was accompanied by an unexpected sharp sting that coursed through my body. As I hung upside down, I felt someone smack me sharply on my rear end, prompting a reflexive cry of pain. When I dared to open my eyes, I found myself gazing into the deep blue eyes of a man with tousled blonde hair. He beamed at me with a joyful smile and welcomed me into this world. "Be most welcome to the world, Naruto Uzumaki," he proclaimed. "Kushina, you must see our son, he is an angel." With that, he gently placed me into the arms of a woman with fiery red hair, who appeared to be weeping. "Yes, Minato, this is our son, our precious baby boy," she said, her voice laced with both joy and sorrow. "I wish I could be with him as he grows, but deep down, I know that may not be the case. You must seal that beast within our son, it is the only way for him to endure the Kyuubi. I am so sorry, Minato, but I am simply too tired." Quote. In that moment, I could only watch as the woman whom I was told was my mother closed her eyes and took her last breath. A profound realization washed over me as I felt something being inscribed on my body. I understood that this was the seal they had spoken of. However, the truth they overlooked was that the creature they so feared, the Kyuubi, was not an external foe, but a part of me, something intrinsically linked to my very essence. This secret was something I needed to guard closely as I embarked on the journey of living as Naruto Uzumaki. I resolved to reclaim the remnants of my strength, to gather the lost pieces of my being. I longed for the day when I would reunite with Kaguya, my beloved, and this time, nothing and no one could tear us apart again. As I lay there in this new, bewildering existence, an old man approached me. He stood before the lifeless forms of my parents and declared his intent to reclaim his role as Hokage. He was unwavering as he announced that his first law would ensure that no one would dare speak of what was sealed within me or label me as a demon. Anyone who violated this law would face severe consequences, not just a warning but a punishment of death. His words hung in the air, an ominous promise that would shape my future and the course of my life in this new world I was thrust into. Growing up in the grim setting of an orphanage, I faced immense challenges that forced me to take control of my own survival. With scarce resources and little authority, I utilized the limited power I possessed to cultivate a small garden in the cramped backyard of the orphanage. This initiative arose from necessity, as the individuals overseeing my care frequently provided meals that were either toxic, spoiled, or, at times, would simply neglect to feed me altogether. It was a harsh existence, but I found a silver lining in the knowledge I carried from my previous life. This understanding enabled me to identify poisons with relative ease, a skill that became vital in navigating the treacherous environment of the ORP. Hanage. Occasionally, a couple would express interest in adopting me. If they had approached the situation honestly, I could have imagined forming a genuine bond with them, stepping into the role of their child with ease. Unfortunately, each pair turned out to be deceitful, motivated by ulterior motives that revolved around taking me deep into the woods and leaving me behind. Their plans, however, were thwarted by my deep-rooted connection to the natural world. The trees and plants remained loyal allies, offering their protection and assisting me in evading attempts to abandon me. One particular instance stands out vividly in my memory. After yet another failed adoption, I returned to the orphanage, and upon being questioned by the elderly caretaker about the whereabouts of my would-be adoptive parents, I concocted a wild story. I told him that ferocious beasts had devoured them while we were ostensibly enjoying a picnic in the forest, an elaborate tale meant to convey the absurdity of my situation. The humor in my lie masked the bitterness of my reality, highlighting the lengths I had to go to in order to survive this nightmare. In response to my story, the woman in charge of the orphanage reacted with unrestrained hostility and flung me into a garbage bin, seemingly hoping that I would succumb to illness and die in obscurity. However, she underestimated my resilience. Unlike what she perceived, I was not the frail child she thought I was. Through sheer will, I managed to reclaim one of the 9 fragments of my soul, which also brought with it the vivid memories of a past life filled with experiences as a warrior, a ruler, and a diplomat. The depth of my previous existence equipped me with insights and knowledge that this facility could never diminish. Engaging her in dialogue would have likely been futile, as she would have dismissed my claims, viewing me either as a rebellious child trying to seem important or as a cunning trickster. Instead, I climbed out of the confines of the trash bin, resolved to take matters into my own hands. If the caretakers were unwilling to provide sustenance, I would adapt. I could cultivate my own food or venture into the woods to hunt the animals that roamed freely. It became evident that the land was fertile, and the tranquility offered by the shade of the trees, coupled with the gentle breeze flowing through the branches, created a welcoming atmosphere that I could harness for my needs. Driven by a newfound purpose, I decided to seek out the Hokage Monument, a significant landmark that bore the likenesses of 2 of my descendants. It was crucial for me to understand why those who shared my bloodline bore such little resemblance to my beloved wife or myself. This journey to uncover my lineage and the story of my heritage would be pivotal in reclaiming my identity. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but I knew that confronting my past and embracing my potential were essential steps in rewriting the narrative of my life. Each year, I found myself following a peculiar but deeply personal tradition. I would make my way to the carved monument, a timeless testament to the legacy of my lineage. Among the intricate figures etched into stone, 2 stood out prominently. They were unmistakably my descendants, figures whose lives had branched out from my own. The act of visiting them felt like a connection to my past and an acknowledgement of the future that followed. However, along with this tradition came an unwelcome annual occurrence, a relentless mob intent on ending my life. This mob, driven more by folly than malice, had surged forward with an alarming frequency over the past 5 years, attempting to ambush me not once, not twice, but year after year. By the 3rd attempt, I reached a boiling point of frustration, a sensation that only intensified with each subsequent encounter. Frankly, it was exhausting to have to deal with such a rabble of misguided souls. If they truly wished to succeed in their murderous endeavors, one would think they would take a moment to plan their approach, to study my movements, and to put some thought into their ambush. Instead, they exhibited a level of incompetence that often left me questioning their basic intelligence. Their lack of strategy was laughable, nearly as lowly as the instincts of an ant when it came to survival. During these encounters, as they hurled insults and demanded my death, they branded me with names that reflected their ignorance. The term, demon, was the most benign of the epithets thrown my way, yet I remained steadfast in my resolve not to stoop to their level by echoing their words back at them. My capacity for mercy had long since eroded, the absence of my one true beloved had left my heart encased in frost, and with that chilling void, any remnants of compassion had dried up. As they launched their attacks, I had developed a rather effective response. In a swift motion, I would summon the earth itself, commanding a tree to burst forth from the ground beneath them. The branches grew rapidly, spiraling toward their targets with an alarming ferocity, often piercing the hearts of those who sought to ambush me. Each time, I would simply walk away from the chaos I left behind, an eerie calm enveloping me as I glanced back at the scene. What remained was a stark reminder of their folly, a tree adorned with the remains of the assailants, hanging lifelessly like lanterns strung up for a New Year's celebration. There were moments when I could hear Kaguya's voice echoing in my mind, questioning my approach. Why bother with the spectacle of a tree? She would ask. You could incinerate them all in an instant. Initially, I had hoped that the sight of the gruesome aftermath might serve as a deterrent, alas. In the futility of their attempts. However, after years of the same cycle, it became painfully clear that my method was failing to yield the desired effect. Arriving back at my dwelling, a cozy cave nestled at the base of Hokage Mountain, I found two individuals waiting for me. One was a man I had met only once, the day I was brought into this world, while the other was a mysterious figure, a dog-masked Anbu. Silently, I thought to myself how unprepared I was for guests. If I had known I would have visitors, I mused silently, I might have foraged some leaves to brew tea. I do have some snacks growing in the back of the cave, after all. The ordinary comforts of life felt strangely distant in the wake of my tumultuous encounters, yet somehow, there in my cave, a sense of normalcy lingered, waiting to be reclaimed. The old man, his face lined with wisdom and experience, fixed his gaze on me, a mixture of amusement and concern playing across his features. If only this was a simple visit, Naruto, he said with a chuckle that echoed softly in the cave. I need to discuss what transpired 3 times now. Additionally, I must understand why you are not residing in the orphanage and what your plans are for your future. In response, I focused intently on him and performed a quick hand sign. From the earth beneath us, a pair of small trees sprouted, shaping themselves into stools for us to sit upon, while I settled onto a smoothly contoured rock that formed just right for my needs. Those people broke the law, I stated firmly, a hint of anger creeping into my voice. They called me a demon, and by their actions, they sealed their fate. If that isn't justification enough in your eyes, Lord Hokage, then I assert that my response was an act of self-defense. As for the orphanage, or rather the owner who claims to run it, she was the one who disposed of me like dross. When I was only 5 years old, tossing me into a garbage bin behind that ramen stand in the heart of the town. I tried to reach out to you about this, I continued, a tinge of frustration evident in my tone. But your secretary turned me away, denying me access to you. I even contemplated sneaking through an open window, but I thought that would be an impolite approach. Plus, there was no assurance that you would believe my words when it comes to something so outrageous. As for my future plans, isn't that exactly what you intend to inform me about today, Lord Hokage? A hearty laugh escaped him as he regarded me, a glimmer of understanding passing between us. It is indeed difficult to fathom that my cousin, the owner of the orphanage, would treat anyone in such a manner. And as for my secretary, she often keeps me buried under mountains of paperwork, but you are correct. I am here to let you know that you have reached the age where you can enroll in the academy. Quote, I scratched the back of my head in disbelief, my right pinky absent-mindedly cleaning the ear as I mulled over his words. And why, pray tell, would I want to go to the academy? What possible advantage could I possibly gain from attending there? Quote, the old man shook his head slowly, a look of disappointment crossing his features. For one, you would acquire a profession. After graduation, you could enjoy a steady income. Furthermore, to sweeten the deal for you, I would arrange for you to have your own apartment, provide you with a monthly allowance for personal expenses, and I will speak to my secretary to allow you entry into the academy whenever you wish. His offer was generous, yet it felt almost insincere. A typical child would likely beam with joy and gratitude at such an opportunity, but I was no mere child. Regardless of the age my body might suggest, I remained aware that he saw me primarily as the vessel of the nine tails. He was unaware that I had not just contained the tailed beast but had absorbed its essence, regaining a fragment of the formidable power that came with it. Here's my condition, I replied, my voice steady and resolute. Grant me access to your private library as well as the ninja library. Moreover, I would prefer an apartment in the Anbu residential building. That arrangement would facilitate their ability to watch over me, reducing the likelihood that I would have to resort to lethal measures against those who might threaten me. Fulfill these requests, and you will have a deal. Quote, the old man, visibly impressed, began to nod his head slowly in agreement. Most kids aren't as level-headed as you are, Naruto. I see your point, and all right, I agree with those conditions you've laid out. But tell me, is that really all you want to stipulate? His voice carried the weight of experience, and I could sense the respect he had for my maturity. Internally, I wrestled with the thought of the academy's potential biases. The looming shadow of negative experiences from other students weighed on me, especially considering how the supposed teachers might be blinded by their own prejudices and hatred, leading them to treat me unfairly. With this in mind, I turned my gaze towards the dog-masked Anbu standing nearby, determined to clarify my position further. If, for any reason, the academy decides to give me a failing grade, and I end up unable to pursue my dream of becoming a ninja, then I want the right to gather my belongings and choose my own path in life. This will be my decision alone, and neither you nor anyone else will have the power to interfere with what I choose to do. The atmosphere shifted as the old man processed my words. He rose from his stool and approached me, extending his hand in a gesture of agreement. Our handshake was more than just a formality, it was the solidification of a mutual understanding between us. In that moment, it felt as if we had forged an unbreakable pact. I could sense a newfound determination building within me, igniting a fire for what lay ahead. With our accord established, thoughts raced through my mind as I realized the significance of the upcoming day. Tomorrow marked my very first day at the academy, a pivotal moment in my journey toward becoming a ninja. I needed to gather my thoughts and prepare myself for the challenges ahead, knowing that this was just the beginning of a long and winding road. The next morning greeted me with a sense of bitterness that lingered in the air like a thick fog. I found myself frustrated, not only with the way I felt but also due to the constant, unwelcome stares that seemed to follow me as I moved through the streets. It was as though the eyes of the townspeople were fixated on me, scrutinizing every detail of my appearance and my makeshift attire. My clothes and gear were a patchwork of what I had managed to salvage, items I had painstakingly repaired or modified from the remnants left behind by bandits or by others who deemed them useless. I couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and embarrassment, thankful that the bandits had taken to raiding places where they also pilfered countless rolls of cloth, leather, and other essential materials that now served as the building blocks of my existence. The Hokage's assurances about my new apartment turned out to be true. It was genuinely nice, a small haven that provided a semblance of stability in an otherwise chaotic world. However, what he didn't mention was the financial reality I would face. He had arranged for a monthly stipend to be deposited into my name, yet the stark truth was that this sum would dwindle rapidly if I so much as splurged on something as basic as an apple or a roll of toilet paper. The grim awareness of this restriction weighed heavily on my mind and served to amplify my frustration. When I finally wandered to the local market, the reality of the situation smacked me in the face. I approached the apple stand, drawn in by the vibrant colors of the fruit, but when I saw the price tag, my heart sank. It was more than I could afford, a cruel reminder of my financial limitations. Feeling a surge of indignation, I brought the matter to the attention of the cashier, who met my inquiry with an unyielding stoicism. Her response was disheartening. She coldly informed me that the listed price was for everyone else, while I, for reasons unfathomable to me, was expected to pay a different, and exorbitantly higher, price. The intensity of the emotions bubbling within me required immense restraint to contain. I turned and walked out of the store, feeling as if I had just escaped from a suffocating cage. The moment I exited, the atmosphere shifted, and to my astonishment, the patrons inside erupted into cheers as if THEY had been liberated from my presence. The cacophony of voices rang in my ears as I made my way to a nearby forest. There, drawing upon my chakra, I summoned an apple tree to life, its branches heavy with lush, ripe fruit. In that moment, I considered gathering a bag full of these splendid apples and returning to confront the market manager and that dismissive cashier, delivering them a resounding message that they could keep their overpriced produce. Determined to move forward, I made my way to the academy, a place I had hoped would signify new beginnings. However, upon my arrival, the staff greeted me with blatant disdain, practically shooing me away as though I was an unwelcome pest. They made it abundantly clear that a creature like me had no rightful place in their esteemed institution. Ignoring their condescending attitudes, I forged ahead, determined to find my assigned classroom, which I had noted down the night before. Clutching the 2 apples I had picked in the forest, I hoped to make a positive impression on my teachers, despite the hurdles I faced. As I approached the door, a sense of urgency propelled me forward. I raised my hand and knocked firmly, but the silence that followed was disheartening. There was no response from within the classroom. Growing increasingly frustrated, I rapped on the door once more, this time with more force, hoping to attract attention. Yet again, my efforts were met with silence, and my irritation began to boil over. In a moment of exasperation, I pounded my fist against the door, the impact reverberating through the air. To my surprise, the door finally gave way, bursting free from its frame and crashing loudly to the floor, TLING everyone inside. In the midst of this chaos stood the teacher, who was easily recognizable due to his distinctive ponytail and the noticeable scar that traced a path across his face, originating from the bridge of his nose. He looked up from his desk with a mix of annoyance and curiosity, addressing me directly. "Yes, can I help you, young man? As you can see, we are in the middle of class and do not have much time to spare." Quote. Frustration coursing through my veins, I pulled out the letter I had received from the old man. My emotions spiraled, and in a fit of anger, I crumpled the letter into a tight ball, wrapping it around the apple I had brought with me. With a swift motion, I hurled the makeshift projectile at him. To my astonishment, he caught it effortlessly, as if it were merely a routine occurrence. He unfurled the letter and began to munch on the apple while perusing its contents. The moment he reached the signature, his expression shifted, and he glanced up at me with intrigue. Calling me closer, he gestured for me to come stand by his side. "I apologize, Naruto," he said, his tone softening slightly. "I was not informed that we would have a new addition to our classroom." His eyes swept over the students, and he cleared his throat before making an announcement that shifted the atmosphere in the room. "Class, I have some news before we continue with our lesson. The young man standing next to me is our new classmate, and his name is Naruto Uzumaki. Please make him feel welcome. As for the material we have been covering, I am confident you will catch up in no time. If needed, I can ask our class representative to assist you in getting up to speed." The room buzzed with murmurs and curious glances, signaling the start of a new chapter in my life. At that moment, a girl with striking pink hair stood up from her seat, her voice cutting through the hushed atmosphere of the classroom with an unmistakable intensity. I would not give that thing a bucket of piss if he caught on fire, she declared, her expression a mix of defiance and disdain. You either catch up on your own or fail, so don't expect any favors from me. Her words hung in the air, making it clear that she had no intention of offering help to anyone who struggled, especially not to someone who might have been perceived as a burden. This abrupt display of hostility was, I suppose, what constituted the warm welcome I had heard whispers about before. Starting this class, it reaffirmed my initial resolution not to rely on my peers for support. I had already taken the time to wait patiently until my teacher assigned me a seat, and, lo and behold, I found myself placed in the middle row, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and an unmistakable undertone of competition. With a desire to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention to myself, I began to make my way to the newly assigned seat. Unfortunately, as I navigated the narrow aisles, someone attempted to trip me, clearly hoping to make a fool of me in front of the entire class. However, instead of faltering as they intended, I swiftly retaliated with a sharp kick to the leg of my assailant, a calculated move that allowed me to maintain my balance as I continued to my seat unscathed. Settling down into my chair, I braced myself for the lecture that had been in progress when I first walked in. If I were to summarize the lecture in a single word, it would undoubtedly be boring. However, that would be a gross oversimplification, as I soon realized the content presented by my TAC. Her was riddled with inaccuracies. Despite feeling a strong urge to correct the numerous mistakes he made throughout his presentation, I refrained from speaking up. I didn't want to show any disrespect towards my teacher, even if my grasp of history was more substantial than his. The theories he discussed were far from groundbreaking or innovative, merely reiterating concepts that I had encountered countless times before. Thus, I remained silent, absorbing the lecture despite its glaring shortcomings, wondering how this had become the expected standard of education in this environment. It seems that dedicating the previous night to researching the new information uncovered since my time as emperor has indeed proven beneficial. This preparation allowed me to re-engage with the vast array of knowledge that has emerged in my absence. However, I found myself unsettled by the way my beloved was depicted in the recent discussions. The portrayal was less than flattering, and it stirred a sense of protectiveness within me. On the other hand, I felt a swell of pride when I learned about the accomplishments attributed to my eldest child. It was heartening to see their efforts recognized. After the series of lectures concluded, we were informed that we would soon transition into a practical session, which would be led by another instructor. Uruka, who had been guiding us thus far, introduced this new teacher as Mizuki. Mizuki was tasked with imparting practical skills to us, a shift that promised to be both engaging and challenging. As a light-hearted gesture, I tossed an apple in Mizuki's direction, expecting him to catch it like Ka had earlier. However, Mizuki reacted differently. He shot me a sharp glare, one that was notably harsher than Uruka's, and then he stared at the apple I had thrown as if it were a venomous creature. He tossed it back to me with a hint of disdain, muttering something under his breath. Although I couldn't catch every word, I perceived that his remarks suggested a distrust of my intentions, implying that he suspected the apple could have been tampered with, or perhaps, in his interpretation, that my very touch was hazardous. His whisper was low enough that the details escaped me, yet the sentiment was crystal clear. Undeterred by his attitude, I simply retrieved my kunai and took a bite of the apple, savoring its crispness as Mizuki launched into his lecture on practical skills. He demonstrated the proper techniques for throwing various weapons, including shuriken and kunai, ensuring that we understood the mechanics behind each action. As he spoke, it became apparent that his words carried a subtle undercurrent of sarcasm directed my way, laden with veiled insults that insinuated my shortcomings. It was evident that I might struggle in this particular segment of our training, given Mizuki's apparent intent to remind me of my perceived inadequacies. The person who occupied the seat right next to mine in class was a rather unremarkable figure at first glance. He wore glasses that sat low on his nose and had an appearance that did not suggest he was the type who would engage in light-hearted conversations or small talk with classmates. His name was Shino, or at least that's what the whispers and murmurs around the room indicated, almost as if the insects that buzzed in and around him were divulging his identity. Shino had an air of quietness about him, almost introverted, and he seemed content to observe rather than participate in the lively banter of our peers. Just behind me was another student named Sasuke, who was the polar opposite of Shino. The regard that others had for Sasuke was palpable. People treated him with a sort of reverence that suggested he was not merely a classmate but rather someone of significant importance, perhaps even the crown prince of our village. Sasuke seemed to embrace this image fully, carrying himself with an undeniable confidence that bordered on arrogance, as if he expected everyone to bow to his presence. In addition to these two, the other boy who sat beside me had a hairstyle that resembled a pineapple, an unruly, spiky mess that seemed to defy gravity. While he might have been amusing to look at, his demeanor suggested he was less interested in actual learning and more inclined toward slacking off. This trio composed our little section in class, and even when we transitioned to the open field for our practical lessons, the seating arrangement remained unchanged. As the lesson commenced, I found myself singled out by our instructor, Mizuki, who had a reputation for being particularly demanding. He called me forward with a glint of expectation in his eye, likely hoping to embarrass me by showcasing my inadequacies to the rest of the class. He handed me a set of kunai and directed me to aim at various targets placed strategically around the field. With a sense of calm determination, I took each kunai he provided and threw them with precision. To his surprise, and perhaps to the astonishment of my classmates, I hit every target dead center, the kunai embedding themselves into the circles marked on the dummies. These targets were not mere training aids. They had circles carved into them, each representing vital points on the human body that one would aim for in a real confrontation. My understanding of these points was not theoretical. I had lived through a war, a reality where such skills were not just for practice but for survival. The act of hitting those targets was second nature for me, a testament to the experience I had gained from my past. As the instructor's expectations crumbled before my eyes, I felt an unexpected sense of accomplishment swell within me, reminding me that my history had equipped me well for this moment. Mizuki referred to it as beginner's luck. He instructed me to take a seat and proceeded to call upon another student to take their turn. The subsequent participant was none other than the pink-haired woman who had previously shown me kindness. This time, however, she was not so fortunate. In fact, she missed every single one of her targets. This woman, whom I had come to know as Sakura, seemed to struggle to perform even the simplest task, as her kunai barely traveled far enough to hit the targets at all. Sakura expressed her dissatisfaction, claiming that throwing kunai at such a distance was damaging her fingernails. While I understood that personal appearance could be a concern for many, I couldn't help but think that this was a ninja academy. If she was so preoccupied with her looks, it seemed to me that perhaps her interests would be better suited to a modeling academy rather than here. But I kept that thought to myself, as voicing it would only serve to diminish my own standing. Seated next to Sakura was another girl, someone whose disdain for Sakura was apparent and perhaps even greater than mine. Their tension was palpable, and it escalated when Sakura attempted to trip this girl, clearly trying to cause her to stumble. The girl was named Ino, and unlike Sakura, she displayed a degree of competence. She managed to hit 3 of the targets Mizuki had pointed out, demonstrating that not everyone struggled with the exercise. For reasons I could not quite understand, perhaps out of pity for their dismal performances, I felt compelled to intervene in the glaring contest between Ino and Sakura. As I approached them, both girls shifted their focus from one another to me, directing their fierce glares in my direction instead. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before addressing them. "Girls," I started, "it's all a matter of measuring the wind, where it's coming from and how strong it is. When you sense the right moment, the moment of least resistance, you need to throw while the side of the kunai is flat. The essence of a successful throw lies in putting enough strength into your wrist." It was a simple explanation, one that I hoped would resonate with them and improve their performance in this challenging environment. It was truly surprising to witness both of them come to an agreement on something for once. In that moment, I felt as if the world around me was on the verge of an explosion, as if the very fabric of reality had been altered. Their shared consensus was not about a topic of great importance or significance, rather, it was a mutual acknowledgement that my contributions were entirely unwelcome. They both swiftly concluded that my opinions were worthless, and in a moment of unexpected unity, they suggested that I should take my so-called insights and shove them where the sun doesn't shine. Such an exchange of thoughtful and considerate remarks left me feeling surprisingly uplifted, a sense of relief washing over me after their displayed care. This incident served as a telling lesson. It became abundantly clear that any efforts I might make to assist these two individuals were utterly futile. Their lack of appreciation for my advice was a firm indication that they preferred to navigate their own paths, no matter how misguided that might be. In light of their dismissive attitude, I resolved that I would not squander my energy or time trying to help them again. The realization hit me hard, and I knew I had no desire to repeat this particular mistake in the near future. The dynamics of this situation closely mirrored my experiences in my practical lessons. Whenever I answered a question posed by the instructor, my responses were often met either with indifference or outright ridicule. It seemed as though my contributions were largely falling on deaf ears. There was also a moment when I attempted to display my accuracy by throwing an object that was supposedly deemed a miss. Ironically, the very weapon I tossed had landed squarely on the target, yet my efforts went unrecognized. During sparring matches, the atmosphere felt anything but competitive, rather, it resembled a parent disciplining a badly behaved child instead of engaging in a genuine fight. Recognizing that my opportunities for meaningful learning were woefully limited, I made a decisive choice from my very first day in class. I understood that the only viable option left for me was to take charge of my own education. Rather than depending on the teachers, who seemed disinterested in my progress, I decided to use my time in class more wisely. I resolved to study at my own pace, focusing on my own learning rather than relying on an inadequate system. If I found that I wasn't going to gain anything particularly valuable during class, then I would turn that time into something beneficial for myself. So, instead of grappling with the limited interactions, I opted to take a much-needed nap, replenishing myself for the journey ahead in my self-directed learning adventure. The librarian, in her condescending tone, practically asserted that someone like me had no place among the precious volumes used within the library. The moment she referred to me as a demon, a term she likely thought would intimidate me into submission, the atmosphere shifted. It was as if her words had crossed an invisible line, igniting something within me. In an instant, I retrieved a kunai from my hip pouch, its cold metal glinting ominously, and with a swift and decisive motion, I slashed her throat from ear to ear. I watched as the life drained from her, her body crumpling to the floor, leaving a dark pool of crimson staining the polished wood bene. Her. I had no inclination to linger in a place filled with such ignorance and prejudice. Time was precious, and I refused to waste another second on those who chose to break the law. The reaction of the other patrons in the library was immediate and chaotic. Their horrified screams filled the air, a cacophony of panic as they fled the building as if it were engulfed in flames. This sudden exodus granted me a rare solitude, an opportunity to focus on the task at hand without the distractions of onlookers. It was then that a memory resurfaced, a technique known as the shadow clone jutsu. Harnessing this powerful ability, I quickly created 12 clones, each one tasked with the responsibility of scouring the stacks for books of interest. I was prudent enough to instruct the clones to alter their appearance, ensuring they resembled ordinary ninjas rather than a figure shrouded in infamy. With my clones dispersed throughout the library, I settled into the enjoyment of a book that explored the complex world of poisons, its pages filled with knowledge that was both fascinating and practical. However, my moment of peace was soon interrupted by the arrival of an old man, stepping cautiously into the library, oblivious to the scene that had unfolded moments earlier. He navigated around the lifeless body of the librarian with an air of disbelief, his muttered thoughts barely audible over the residual chaos. As I turned my gaze from the book, I met his questioning look. "Naruto, was it really necessary to kill this woman?" he asked, the incredulity in his voice palpable. I felt a surge of frustration at such a question, shaking my head in disbelief. This man, who had a hand in crafting the law itself, had established punishments for those who dared to label me a demon. He even instituted a death penalty for such offenses, yet here he was, surprised by my actions that were merely a reflection of the very laws he had created. It was baffling to witness such a disconnect between his expectations and the reality of the situation. She broke the law, and I took the necessary steps to ensure she faced the consequences as dictated by the law. I understand that adherence to legal protocols is crucial, but now, if you will excuse me, Lord Hokage, I must express that my day at the academy was far from pleasant. I found myself yearning for some meaningful learning experiences before the day draws to a close. There is a book I am currently engrossed in, focusing on poisons and their antidotes, and I find it utterly fascinating. The knowledge contained within these pages is something I deeply appreciate, and I often wish I could travel to Suna to have an engaging conversation with the book's author, who is undoubtedly knowledgeable in this intricate field. Quote, "Considering Lord Hokage's history as a combatant in the Second Ninja World War, I hesitated to express my admiration for Lady Chiyo, a revered Suna ninja known for her expertise in the puppeteer division. I worried that he might not share my enthusiasm for her work. Despite my reservations, he surprised me by taking a seat in an empty chair right next to me, which made our conversation feel more personal. I am sure Lady Chiyo will find your comments on her book to be quite flattering. Now that you have mentioned that, would you mind telling me what transpired at the academy that has led to your current mood?" he inquired, looking at me with curiosity. I glanced back at him, slightly perplexed by his interpretation of my demeanor. I certainly didn't consider myself to be in a foul mood, rather, I felt bored to the point of exhaustion. How could that possibly be classified as being foul? "Well, let me think," I began, feeling the need to clarify my situation. "The staff at the academy practically told me to get lost, making me feel unwelcome from the very start. It was so bad that I had to literally knock down the door to my classroom just to get my teacher's attention. Can you believe that? My desk is positioned uncomfortably between a slacker who never pays attention and a brooding classmate who seems more interested in the latest trends of angst than in our lessons. To make matters worse, there's also a boy seated nearby who is so engrossed in his obsession with bugs that he rarely participates in class discussions. And if you think that's all, my practical lesson was more impractical than anything I've ever encountered, and I endured insults from my peers throughout the entire session. It's hard to maintain a positive outlook with such a disheartening experience." I looked at him, observing the way he nodded his head in a steady rhythm as if in agreement with some unspoken truth. "So you see," he continued, "I have absolutely no reason to have any negative reaction to the things that happened to me at all. I had a wonderful day filled with friendships that warmed my heart, kind words that lifted my spirits, and considerate teachers who went out of their way to ensure that I felt supported. To make matters even better, I encountered a very nice and helpful librarian who was more than willing to assist me in my search for knowledge and understanding. She truly made my experience in the library enjoyable. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to study some things that, in all honesty, I may never truly manage to learn in that place." As he spoke, he reached out, taking the book from my hands and locking eyes with me. "So that is what happened. Look, Naruto," he said, his tone shifting slightly to emphasize the gravity of the situation. "While you grow up, you must learn to navigate interactions with people you don't particularly like or those with whom you can't seem to get along. It's simply a matter of life. You could have easily walked out of the library and come straight to my office, informed me about the incident, and I would have taken care of the situation for you. The only difference in that scenario would have been that poor woman might still be alive today." Quote, I met his gaze, shaking my head vigorously as I processed his words. If I did that and chose not to hold accountable the person who broke the law, then your law becomes more of a suggestion than an actual law. What you're asking me to do is to bring the offender or offenders to you, but it goes deeper than that. It's quite simple. You need to change the law itself. You need to rewrite it because instead of stating, and I quote, "Those that are found breaking this law are to be executed on the spot," it show. LD reflect the necessity for justice without extremities. I was only obeying the law, Lord Hokage, he replied with a hint of defensiveness, further asserting his position as he sought clarity in the dialogue. I don't see where the problem lies here. Can I have the book back now? With that, he extended his hand. I returned the book to him, watching as a smile spread across his face. But I must ask you this, he continued playfully, if, in fact, the law changed and required me to passionately kiss a person who called me a demon, would I genuinely do it? His eyes sparkled with mischief, softening the seriousness of our conversation. I found myself in a position where I had no choice but to agree to his request. Yes, I will, I replied, although I couldn't help but think about how essential it was for me to find a strong mouthwash afterward to rid myself of the unpleasant taste lingering in my mouth. He looked at me with a knowing expression and said, "You know, Naruto, the reason we have actual teachers is that students often lack the understanding of what they truly need to study. So, what exactly are you using as a guide in your academic pursuits?" As I glanced back at him, I couldn't suppress a smile as he handed me the book I had been engrossed in just moments before. I don't really need a guide, I explained confidently. I guess you could say I'm a bit more mature than most of my peers. I have a clear sense of what knowledge is essential for me. His laughter filled the air, and instead of leaving me to my reading, he chose to sit right next to me. I could feel his presence, watching intently as I flipped through one book after another, fully absorbed in the worlds they offered. Occasionally, he would reach over and pick up one of my selections, curious about my choices, asking me questions about why I found those particular books appealing. Never did I expect my visit to the library to turn into a sort of supervised reading session, especially not one overseen by the Hokage himself. It was both amusing and slightly unnerving, but there was something about this experience that felt oddly comforting. In the back of my mind, a fleeting thought crossed my mind, a concern about the nature of the punishment I was serving. I sincerely hoped he wouldn't decide to escalate it to anything ridiculous, like having me kiss the offender. Memories flooded back to me, thanks to my observations of that so-called tailed beast. I had regained some cherished recollections of my beloved wife. Kaguya was the love of my life, but she had her own way of handling things. If she sensed any romantic advances directed at me, she could become quite possessive and fierce. Even with a lifetime of experience behind me, I find that I can still possess a certain level of naivety. This realization struck me particularly hard after the first year of my schooling. Despite my efforts to excel, I received what felt like the lowest grades possible. I remember walking into the exam room, filled with confidence, having meticulously prepared for the questions presented to me. I answered them to the best of my ability and achieved perfect scores in the practical exam. At least I believed I should have ranked at the top of my class. To my utter disbelief, I discovered that I was actually placed dead last. Moving into my second year, a flicker of hope emerged. I thought perhaps the disappointing outcome of my first year had been an unfortunate mistake. After all, everyone can make errors from time to time. I approached my studies with renewed determination, eager to prove myself. However, as the new year progressed, I found myself facing the same disheartening reality. Once again, I was dutifully informed that I was at the bottom of the rankings. At this point, it became increasingly impossible to ignore the patterns that were emerging. It didn't take long for me to begin to suspect that something was amiss. It seemed as if someone was tampering with my exams, or perhaps the grading practices were not as fair and transparent as they should have been. As I grappled with these thoughts, my concern for how my teachers evaluated our performance began to wane. Their opinions on grades and the titles they assigned started to hold little weight for me. This shift in mindset led to a drastic change in my approach to school. I began to take naps in class, only putting in the bare minimum effort during practical skills sessions. Instead of dedicating my energy to the curriculum imposed by my instructors, I found solace and purpose in the forest of Ath. There, I invested my time in reading, practicing my skills, and engaging with the creatures that inhabited that wild and untamed space. To be honest, the beings in that forest offered me a level of companionship and understanding that often felt absent among the humans in my village. They became my friends, with whom I could share conversations, laughter, and stories. Together, we even assisted some of their kin in the joyful process of bringing new life into the world. The little ones were undeniably adorable, and the experience of helping these creatures added a sense of fulfillment that I had not found in the rigid confines of the classroom. Over time, the bond I formed with the inhabitants of the forest provided me with a sense of belonging and joy that I had long been searching for. Throughout my final year in the village, I was acutely aware of my intentions to leave, which greatly influenced how I conducted myself among my classmates. I made a conscious choice to keep my interactions polite and civil, yet intentionally kept them at a distance that could hardly be described as friendly or sociable. This approach stemmed from my understanding that forming deeper connections with my peers would only complicate my imminent departure. Consequently, I limited my engagements to the bare minimum, operating under the belief that emotional entanglements would only serve to end the pain of leaving. Surprisingly, maintaining this distance turned out to be simpler than I anticipated. My classmates seemed to avoid me instinctively, as if I were carrying an affliction that was contagious. I couldn't help but acknowledge that the constant gossiping of classmates like Sakura and Ino inadvertently contributed to my solitude. While I had no reason to express gratitude towards them, their chatter effectively pushed me further into the shadows, making it easier for me to remain outside the social circles that thrived within the classroom. As I approached the end of my schooling, I braced myself for the inevitable label of dead last, a title I had become all too familiar with. The thought of being assigned to a team with classmates I could barely tolerate filled me with dread. The idea of having to collaborate with individuals while protecting a village that had been a source of continuous torment was particularly unsettling. I tried to temper my pessimism, reminding myself that even the depths of hell couldn't compare to the emotional struggles I faced in a place that was supposedly called Konoha. I had unflattering names for it in my mind, but those thoughts were best left unspoken. When the day finally arrived for my classmates to receive their leaf headbands, my heart raced with conflicting emotions. One by one, names were called, and my classmates approached the large table to collect their headbands, each one beaming with pride and excitement. The air was charged with a sense of accomplishment and camaraderie, but as each name echoed through the room, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. When it became clear that my name would not be called, I struggled to contain an overwhelming wave of joy. It took all my self-control not to leap from my seat, celebrating the fact that I would not have to endure the burdens of teamwork or the expectations of a future I desperately wanted to escape. I walked to the front of the academy, the familiar surroundings bringing both comfort and a heavy sense of nostalgia. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. Among the large trees that dotted the area, one in particular caught my eye. It was a sturdy tree with a swing set hanging from one of its thick branches. The swing swayed gently in the evening breeze, a relic of simpler times filled with laughter and joy. Reflecting on the fact that I might never swing on that set again filled me with a mix of melancholy and determination. It was a bittersweet reminder of the carefree days of my childhood, but I knew that my focus had to shift. I settled onto the swing, feeling its rough wood beneath me, and began to contemplate my next steps. Collecting the scattered pieces of my soul had become an urgent mission, one that weighed heavily on my mind. Each fragment represented not just a part of me, but also the hope of one day reuniting with my beloved wife. The thought of her brought a warmth to my heart, igniting a flicker of hope amidst the shadows that surrounded me. I found myself gazing up at the night sky. The moon hung high, its luminous glow piercing the darkness, a radiant beacon of comfort. I whispered softly to the cool night air, one day, we will be together again, my love. This time, nothing and no one will keep us apart. As I immersed myself in my thoughts, I heard footsteps drawing closer. I turned to see Mizuki approaching, his expression a mix of concern and apprehension. His presence stirred a sense of unease within me. I couldn't fathom what he might want. Mizuki stopped a few steps away and began to speak. I am sorry, Naruto. I know you always give your all in my lessons. You genuinely wanted to graduate, didn't you? I understand it must feel incredibly unfair, but you must understand that without the necessary skills to be a ninja, allowing you to graduate would be akin to signing your own death warrant. Quote. His words pierced through me, a confluence of frustration and irritation washing over me. It felt almost insulting, as if he had underestimated my determination. I glared at him, sensing the insincerity behind his sympathetic facade. You know, Naruto, if you could demonstrate to everyone that you truly possess the required skills, I would be able to award you that coveted headband and grant you graduation, he continued, his tone shifting slightly. Ninjas often have to undertake risky missions, including stealing scrolls from enemy bases. In that moment, I realized that this was not just about proving myself to Mizuki or the academy. It was about reclaiming my identity and my past, about forging my own path in a world fraught with challenge. I couldn't allow anyone's doubts to define me. I steeled my resolve, ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that every piece I collected would bring me closer to the reunion I longed for. To accomplish this mission, the plan was simple yet bold. The target was the Hokage's office, where I needed to enter without drawing any attention to myself. My goal was to seize the large red scroll hanging on the wall near the Hokage's desk. This scroll, rumored to contain powerful jutsu, was essential to my next steps. From there, I would make my way to the old hunting cabin tucked away in the woods, a place well within my familiarity. Once there, I could study the scroll and learn a single jutsu from its contents. If successful, I would arrange to meet the one who set this task before me and demonstrate my new ND abilities. The promise of graduation from the academy was on the line, hinging on the successful execution of this daring plan. As I absorbed the details of the scheme, I began to nod in agreement, standing up to feign compliance and let my would-be trickster believe he had outsmarted me. However, the moment I started to formulate my escape, a cascade of memories surfaced within me. These memories, remnants of the 9 tales I had absorbed, offered vital insights. Among them was a recollection that clarified the situation. Contrary to what I had been led to believe, the so-called Forbidden Scroll was not merely a valuable item within the village, it was originally the property of the Uzumaki clan. In fact, many of the jutsu inscribed within it were developed by my ancestors, making it a piece of my heritage rather than something to be stolen. With this knowledge illuminating my path, I decided to leave a note for the Hokage. In it, I expressed my deep-seated frustrations regarding the continued mistreatment I faced in the village. The discrimination had reached unbearable levels, manifesting in acts as humiliating as having hate messages scrawled in manure on the walls of my home. I was exhausted from the constant battle to clean up such vandalism, often resorting to using wind and water jutsu to restore some semblance of order. In my letter, I asserted my intention to take what rightfully belonged to my clan. I emphasized that, as someone who was not officially recognized as a ninja of the village, the Hokage had no authority to place my name in the bingo book or pursue any punitive measures against me. I concluded my note with personal farewells, making sure to mention the few individuals who had shown me kindness during my time in the village. Uruka, the teacher who had always believed in me, and the proprietors of Ichiraku Ramen, who represented the only place where I could enjoy a warm meal, we the ones I wanted to acknowledge. This letter was a declaration of my intent to reclaim my clan's legacy and assert my identity beyond the confines of this village that had so often neglected and mistreated me. I made my way through the familiar paths of the village, my heart pounding with adrenaline at the thought of what was to come. As I navigated the streets filled with whispers and wary glances, it became increasingly clear that the Hokage was not pleased with the situation. His authority was unmistakable, and in response to my actions, he dispatched every Junin and Chunin at his disposal to apprehend me. The notion that he believed these shinobi could successfully catch me struck me as absurd. If he truly thought that this ragtag group would be able to corner someone like me, it was evident that the years were catching up to him. His wisdom and intuition were waning, and it showed in the way he underestimated my resolve and abilities. Arriving at the secluded cabin, I spotted Mizuki waiting for me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and contempt. "I can't believe how stupid you can be," he shouted. "You actually thought I was serious about letting you graduate. Come on. Nobody in this village wants you to rise above anything more than a corpse." His voice dripped with venom as he continued, "Before I kill you and take that scroll for myself, I'm going to lay out exactly why you're so despised." Quote. As he prepared to draw the Fuma shuriken strapped to his back, the tension in the air grew thicker. "Iruka probably told you that the fourth Hokage killed the Nine Tails, but that is a complete lie. The Nine Tails is a creature of pure chakra, and as such, it cannot truly be killed. It was sealed within a newborn, the very newborn you see before you. You are that infant, Naruto. You are the Nine Tails, the monster that ravaged our village and caused the deaths of countless innocents, including my parents. You've turned me and Iruka into orphans." Staring at him, I saw him for the empty shell he really was. "You call that news, Mizuki? Since we're being honest here, I didn't buy your little lie at all. I am merely reclaiming what rightfully belongs to the Uzumaki clan. And you think I was upset about not graduating? You are an even bigger fool than I originally thought. The truth is, I was absolutely overjoyed that I didn't graduate. Can you even begin to fathom the ramifications of that? It took you 6 long years to finally fail me, and you think I would be sorrowful over that? My mind races at the thought of what life would have been like had I actually passed your pathetic tests." Quote. He froze mid-reach for the Fuma shuriken when I voiced my thoughts, a momentary pause that felt like a shift in the air around us. Taking advantage of this unexpected stillness, I decided to elaborate further on my perspective. Fortunately, I had strategically set up several dozen shadow clones, concealed and waiting in the periphery, ready to respond at a moment's notice if needed. "You see," I continued, my voice taking on a more animated tone, "if I had successfully graduated, I would have been assigned to a genin team. Do you realize what that would have meant for me? A lifetime committed to the defense of Konoha, stuck in that place. Can you fathom how suffocatingly miserable my existence would have been, spending every waking moment protecting that particular patch of land that I have so little regard for?" Quote. The intensity of my emotions surged as I recalled the moment when Iruka had pronounced my failure, a weight lifting off my shoulders that I could hardly contain. Do you have any idea how much effort it took for me to suppress the overwhelming urge to leap out of my seat in sheer exhilaration after hearing Iruka say I had failed? I pressed on, enthusiasm bubbling over. If you had been the one to deliver that news instead, and I had been able to express my true feelings freely, I would have wrapped my arms around you in a grateful embrace. That is just how ecstatic I was about it. The fact that I'm not a ninja means I can avoid being recorded in the bingo book or having Hunter Nin dispatched after me. So tell me, does failing me really represent a setback for my life?" Quote. At that point, I could no longer restrain myself. Laughter erupted from me uncontrollably, a wild, manic joy that filled the air between us. "You think I would want to spend my life defending that dump? I can't thank you enough, Mizuki. Your failure has set me free. I am free at long last." My voice rang with an exuberance that seemed to echo off the walls, a declaration of newfound freedom from a life I had never wanted. Mizuki, noticing my outburst, looked at me in bewilderment before he too broke into laughter, a sound that felt oddly misplaced in the tension of the moment. "Well, if you're feeling that thankful," he said, his tone teasing, "why don't you just hand over the forbidden scroll as a little thank you gift?" His delusion was astounding, and it became clear to me just how out of touch he was with reality. If he truly believed that this scroll, a valuable and powerful artifact, would be given so easily to him, he was further gone than I had initially thought. The sheer audacity of the suggestion highlighted how little he understood the depth of my resolve and the strength of my character. It was a stark reminder that I was not the naive kid he presumed me to be. Rather, I was far more than that, and I had no intention of giving him anything he desired. I fixed my gaze on him, a sneer creeping across my lips as I activated my eyes, a deliberate and almost instinctive action. In that instant, the message was clear: all the shadow clones surrounding us were to prepare for a swift and decisive strike. "This is Uzumaki property, you fool," I declared with fervor. "Do you honestly believe I will allow you to take what belongs to me? I refuse to let that dilapidated place you once called a village keep even a scrap of it. If you want it, you'll have to pry it from my cold, dead fingers." In a flash, he sprang into action, launching a Fuma shuriken in my direction. I caught it effortlessly, treating the maneuver like a mundane task, because for me, it was. I had faced far more challenging obstacles than a simple shuriken thrown in haste. A smirk spread across my face as I began to twirl the massive weapon in my hand, relishing the moment. "You'll need to do better than that, Mizuki," I taunted, fully aware of the growing frustration etched on his face. Mizuki erupted into a tirade, spewing insults as he declared that I was nothing but a useless punk, underscoring my status as a mere genin while he proudly proclaimed himself a chunin. "You're just a kid," he shouted. "It would take an entire army to defeat a ninja of my caliber." With a wry smile, I tucked the Fuma shuriken into a seal I had meticulously carved into my belt, a gesture that only underscored my confidence. "Funny you should mention an army," I quipped, my voice laced with amusement. "Guys, time to have some fun. One roasted idiot, if you please, and remember to leave a copy of the scroll after you're done with him." At my command, all my shadow clones, who had been lying in wait, sprang into action, unleashing a flurry of wind and fire jutsu towards him, their varied techniques creating a whirlwind of chaos and a testament to our readiness to defend what was rightfully ours. The air crackled with intensity as the battle commenced, and I felt a surge of excitement coursing through my veins. The location where Mizuki had stood transformed into an inferno, a blazing furnace fueled by an intensity of heat so extreme that the surrounding trees ignited almost instantaneously. One moment they stood tall, casting their shadows over the ground, and the next, they were reduced to nothing but ashes, swept away by the gusting winds. Mizuki's physical body could not withstand such a catastrophic event, and his remains disintegrated, carried off as remnants of a past life. The only tangible item that remained unscathed amidst the devastation was his headband, a symbol of his identity and allegiance, which lay abandoned, a silent witness to the calamity that had unfolded. Nearby, a large scroll, reminiscent of the notorious Forbidden Scroll, was placed meticulously at the site, and I turned on my heel to exit the area, feeling the weight of the moment behind me. As I distanced myself from the tragic scene, I could not help but question Orochimaru's underestimation of my intelligence. Did he genuinely believe I would fall for his trap? I had merely taken a few hundred steps away when a thunderous explosion echoed in the distance, shattering the stillness and serving as a grim reminder of the peril that lurked nearby. Orochimaru, lurking like a serpent in the shadows of a nearby tree, had clearly mistaken my awareness, oblivious to the connections I held with the Serpent Clan, who had once shared with me tales of his ambitions. They had spoken of Orochimaru's relentless pursuit of the very scroll now lying in the ashes, his obsession clouding his judgment. In truth, the village owed me a debt of gratitude for taking that scroll. Its existence under Orochimaru's grasp would have spelled disaster. Such a power-hungry individual would stop at nothing, potentially leading to the demise of their cherished Hokage in his quest for domination. Once again, I found myself disappointed by the naive trust the villagers had in their systems, showcasing how easily they overlooked the dangers lurking in their midst. With a clear plan forming in my mind, I resolved to leave Konoha behind, seeking out the locations of two more fragments of my Su-L that remained hidden. Iwa was my destination, where two of those infamous tailed beasts resided. Now, an exhilarating sense of freedom surged within me, fueling my determination. The journey ahead was fraught with risks, yet I was resolute. Nothing would deter me from reclaiming the pieces that belong to me, and I would stop at nothing to reunite with my beloved. The challenges that lay ahead, no matter how daunting, would not stand in my way. I was committed to this quest, driven by the love that transcended all obstacles. The journey to Iowa proved to be remarkably fruitful as I systematically dismantled one bandit group after another, leaving behind nothing but chaos in my wake. Each encounter honed my skills further and allowed me to salvage various items from the defeated bandits. Among these spoils, I found materials that were instrumental in repairing my clothes and gear. The transformations were so significant that the villagers would hardly be able to recognize me. My previous identity was effectively obscured. Gone were my familiar black garments, which I had replaced with rugged leather attire that resembled the color of dried blood, a grim reminder of my recent confrontations. My new top was a hooded jacket adorned with striking black streaks, designed not only for style but also for intimidation. Covering my face was a dark red mask that concealed my features entirely, ensuring that anyone I encountered could not discern my identity. This new appearance was not just a change in wardrobe, it was a powerful psychological tool that added to my aura of menace. As I continued my approach toward Iowa, I discovered that the bandit groups had begun to exchange stories about me. The rumors painted me as a grotesque figure, an unnatural monster whose sole purpose was to stalk and prey upon them, feasting not only on their flesh but also claiming their very souls. These tales, woven with fear and exaggeration, indicated that my actions had struck a chord of terror among my enemies. The fact that they were talking about me in such a way underscored their growing anxiety, an excellent advantage for me to exploit. The cultivation of fear within the hearts of the bandits served as a valuable asset. When adversaries are gripped by fear, they become prone to making critical mistakes. These blunders opened doors for me, allowing for more straightforward encounters and efficient eliminations. In this dance of survival, understanding the psychology of my opponents became as crucial as any weapon I wielded. As I approached Iowa, I felt a surge of confidence. The reputation I was building was just as formidable as my capabilities in battle. Each step brought me closer to my destination, where the culmination of my efforts awaited. As I stood before the massive gates, their imposing presence seemed to command respect and caution. I raised my hand and knocked decisively against the heavy wood, the sound echoing in the still air. I waited, my anticipation tinged with a growing sense of urgency, but silence greeted me in return. I called out a few times, my voice resonating against the fortified structure, yet still, there was no reply. I repeated my efforts for several minutes, my frustration mounting as the quiet persisted. It became apparent that if anyone had sinister intentions towards me, they were certainly doing a poor job of carrying them out. The thought was almost amusing, but I needed to move forward. Resolving to take matters into my own hands, I channeled my energy into an earth jutsu. With a sinking feeling, I descended into the ground, burrowing through the bedrock with precision. After a brief journey through the earth, I emerged from the ground just below a wall shrouded in shadows, cast by the surrounding buildings as the sun dipped lower in the sky. I took a moment to gather my bearings, my senses keenly alert to the powerful chakra signature I had been tracking. I made my way stealthily up the wall and approached the window of the room from which the chakra emanated. Without hesitation, I executed a substitution technique, transforming myself into a seemingly harmless piece of paper that resembled an empty lunchbox. Once inside, I turned to face the formidable figure of Onoki, the Tsuchikage. His eyes were fixed on me, a mix of surprise and anger flickering across his features. "So what exactly did you want coming in here? Try and kill me? You know I may be old, but I have not been a cage all this time simply because there was no one else to take this hat. I am more than capable of taking care of a punk like you, so tell me what you came here to do, and maybe, just maybe you will get to live," he stated, his voice firm and commanding. In the face of his intensity, I took a deep breath and asked if I might sit down first. He regarded me with a critical eye but ultimately conceded, stating that my request would make little difference in the grand scheme of things. Thank you very much, Tsuchikage, I replied, settling into a chair. I had a long trip getting to your village, only to have your village gate guards ignore me. My feet were aching, and I genuinely appreciate you allowing me to sit down. Quote. He gracefully descended into his seat, a hearty laugh escaping his lips as he absorbed the full weight of my words. So, you're telling me that you knocked and attempted to enter the village like a civilized individual. And when you grew weary of being ignored, you decided to make an entrance like this. You didn't come here with the intent to kill me. Given that you are aware of my identity and seemed so desperate to gain access to this village, would you mind sharing what it is that you sought from my domain? Quote. I met his gaze and allowed a smile to spread across my face. Well, the truth is, I came specifically to meet you. You see, I've finally managed to escape that prison I prefer to call a shithole, which is what most people refer to as Konoha. In that place, I was met with nothing but disdain. They essentially cast me aside, despite the fact that I possess skills that would qualify me as a ninja. They flunked me out of the academy without a second thought. Quote, I'm in search of a place to call home, a way to make a living, and simply nicer surroundings. I figured that since this village seems to share my sentiments towards Konoha, there's a possibility we could become fast friends, and perhaps you might even welcome me with open arms. Quote, his laughter filled the room, and he nodded in agreement with my portrayal of Konoha, gliding closer to me as he leaned over his desk. So, you share a hatred for that place, huh? But tell me, why would I extend a warm welcome to you? What is it about you that makes you so special? As I gazed at him, a sense of amusement washed over me, prompting a smile to spread across my face. You see, I began, my tone steady and confident, I am the son of your most despised adversary, the fourth Hokage, renowned as the Yellow Flash of Konoha. My lineage carries with it a legacy that cannot be ignored. In addition to my father's formidable reputation, my mother holds her own distinction. She was known as the most lethal Anbu operative this village has ever seen, a figure feared and respected, called the Red Habanero, the Red Fox Anbu. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in, before expressing my candid thought. I figured, given the circumstances, that you might appreciate having someone like me around. A seal master who possesses the skill to perform the flight of the thunder god. Quote, with a flick of his wrist, he hurled a kunai at me, aiming to end my life in that fleeting moment. Reacting swiftly, I countered by launching one of my own, intercepting his weapon midair, the two kunai clanging together with a sharp sound. The tension hung thick in the air as our eyes locked, and he demanded to know, and why shouldn't I kill you? The question struck me as somewhat ironic, and I couldn't help but emit a chuckle, the laughter bubbling up from a place of shared understanding. Because, I replied, my voice steady amidst the chaos, we actually share a common bond when it comes to our feelings about Konoha. We both harbor a deep-seated hatred for that place. In that moment, it became clear that our paths, though fraught with animosity, were intertwined by our disdain for the village that had shaped us in ways we each resented. I heard Onoki's laughter, light and rather carefree, and turned my gaze towards him, doing my utmost to present a serious demeanor. Give me a break, I said, trying to keep my voice steady and compelling. Why would the son of the fourth Hokage harbor any disdain for the village that his own father sacrificed everything to protect? You know your mother was the most dedicated Anbu that village ever had. If you expect me to accept your viewpoint without question, you're going to need to provide a more convincing explanation. I couldn't help but shake my head in frustration, my disbelief palpable as I continued to articulate my thoughts. You keep referring to that place as a village, yet to me, it felt more like a prison than a community. I was taken to an orphanage where those who were supposed to care for me seemed to wish I were dead. I endured countless harrowing experiences, forced to fend off violent mobs intent on ending my life. And when I finally mustered the courage to approach the market, I was met with exorbitant prices. 10 to 20 times what everyone else paid. There was only one shopkeeper who treated me fairly, and even after passing my exams, they had the audacity to tamper with my results, branding me as the slowest in my class. Can you imagine the humiliation? As I looked at him, observing him settle onto the edge of his desk, I continued. To me, that place was overrun with people who either desired my demise or simply wanted to starve me into submission. Think about it, what does it say about that community when the only creature that showed me any kindness was a wild beast lurking in the nearby woods? It was in that forest that I managed to hunt and gather the essentials I needed to survive, all while sleeping in conditions worse than even the most disreputable establishments. Now, I ask you, if you had lived through such a nightmarish existence, would you feel any sense of loyalty to that place, or would you instead nurture a deep-seated resentment for it? Quote. From the expression on Onoki's face, I could tell he was beginning to grasp the gravity of my situation, understanding why I felt a strong urge to join his village instead. All right, kid, he finally said, his tone shifting to one of acknowledgement. I get it. Yes, if my village had treated me that way, I would likely harbor feelings of hatred towards them as well. So, tell me, he continued thoughtfully, if you found yourself in the position where you had to confront and potentially fight a ninja from that very village, how would you handle Hat's situation? The question posed to me struck me as absurd. The thought of exhibiting mercy towards my adversaries was laughable. I would utilize every resource at my disposal, be it my martial expertise, various weapons, poisons, or even explosives. Why would I show any compassion to that wretched group? Give me a break. If the situation arose, I'd unleash the flight of the Thunder God, indiscriminately eliminating an entire battalion, treating them just as they treated me, like utter garbage. Quote. Onoki, the village leader, began to nod his head in agreement, a glimmer of satisfaction appearing in his expression. Actually, the prospect of witnessing you wield that devastating skill, one that led to the demise of so many from my village during the last war, applied against those who had previously used it against us would indeed be a remarkable sight. However, before we proceed with any plans, you will need to undergo a test to determine your rank. He fixed his gaze upon me, shaking his head thoughtfully for a moment as if contemplating the implications of what he was about to say. Considering your background from that less than ideal place, your test will have to be even more challenging than that of any other candidate. You will take part in a 2-on-1 combat scenario, pitting you against two of the strongest fighters from my village, the Jinchuriki themselves. Quote. I stared at him in disbelief, struggling to wrap my mind around my apparent fortune. All right, I'm willing to take on that challenge, I replied confidently, yet there was a hint of strategic consideration behind my words. However, should both of them suffer any losses during the fight, or if I manage to seize anything from them, I want it to be made clear that it would belong to me permanently, and they will have no claim to it afterward. Deal. He laughed heartily, a sound filled with mockery, and declared that if they were to lose anything to someone like me, then they simply did not deserve to possess it in the first place. This seemingly casual dismissal came with an air of confidence that suggested he believed himself invincible. With an exaggerated motion, he gestured dismissively, conveying that I was more than welcome to keep whatever spoils I had taken from them. It was almost as if he were granting me a favor rather than acknowledging my skill. The stage for this confrontation was set in the grand arena where the Chunin exams were traditionally held. This arena was unlike any other venue, as it was not just a testing ground but a battleground where the fiercest of competitors gathered. In this village, the approach to determining who would be promoted to the rank of Chunin was anything but conventional. They had opted for an all-out tournament format, a chaotic free-for-all that featured an astonishing 50 fighters, men and women alike, going head-to-head all at once. The sheer intensity of this setting promised to elevate the stakes for everyone involved. As I surveyed the arena, I couldn't help but appreciate its imposing structure and the palpable tension in the air. It was a sight to behold, but my attention was quickly drawn to two men stepping forward. They approached with an expression that mirrored the disdain I had experienced from others, particularly those in Konoha. It was a look that suggested they regarded me as little more than an irritating nuisance, akin to something unpleasant that one might find stuck to the bottom of their shoe. One of them introduced himself with an obvious air of arrogance. "So you are our opponent," he said, almost sneering. "I am Roshi, and the man over there is Han." Now, what should we inscribe on your tombstone? Their words dripped with condescension, revealing a shocking lack of respect. It was a stark reminder that not all warriors held the same values or code of honor. In that moment, my thoughts drifted to my own sons. Despite my feelings of inadequacy in raising them, my wife and I had ultimately instilled in them a sense of respect and integrity, qualities that seemed utterly lost on these two. It was clear that they had yet to learn the lessons that come with age and experience. "You can call me Naruto, Naruto Uzumaki," I declared with unwavering confidence, establishing my identity in this high-stakes arena. For those who prefer a touch of artistry, I could be described as the infernal flame that dances on the graves of my enemies, a vivid metaphor that captures the essence of my relentless spirit. With the introductions behind us, I turned my attention to the matter at hand, challenging my opponent's wit a razor-sharp edge. "Now that we've exchanged pleasantries, shall we begin our fight, or do you intend to bore me to death?" In an instant, Onoki made his presence known, and with a booming voice, he called for the fight to commence. The stands, once empty, had suddenly filled with spectators eager for the spectacle. As I readied myself, I seized a kunai and hurled it toward my adversaries. They chuckled at my initial attempt, dodging effortlessly as countless kunai already dotted the arena floor, evidence of countless battles fought in this very space. With the stage set to my liking, it was time to unleash my true offensive. I employed the flight of the Thunder God technique, allowing me to evade one of the incoming attacks with remarkable agility. In a swift motion, I countered and sent my first opponent crashing to the ground, incapacitated. Before I could relish my success, I felt the chill of impending danger as Han, the remaining foe, attempted to ensnare me within a genjutsu. But I was ready. I pivoted and unleashed my own formidable Tsukuyomi against him, ensnaring his consciousness in a haunting illusion. In this twisted space, I bound him to a metal cross, rendering him utterly helpless. It was a sight to behold. He was trapped, incapable of breaking free for what could feel like an eternity. This was my moment. With him immobilized, I seized the opportunity to invade his mind, searching for a fragment of my soul that had been taken from me. I pressed forward, and as soon as the chakra from the tailed beast ceased to flow through him, he fainted, a clear indication of his reliance on that power. It became evident to me that this young ninja had placed too much trust in the tailed beast, and now, that dependency would be his undoing. Once he was free from the confines of the arena, Onoki executed a technique that caused the unconscious Han to levitate and drift out of the fighting space, leaving me to face only Roshi. With no distractions, I quickly assessed the situation. Roshi, brandishing a large mace, approached with aggression. I remembered our previous exchanges and prepared to replicate my earlier success. As he swung the mace towards me, I timed my movements precisely and delivered a powerful kick aimed at incapacitating him. However, rather than falling to my blow, he dropped the mace and went for a more lethal approach, attempting to grasp my neck in a violent hold. Reacting swiftly, I seized him by his throat, seizing control of the struggle. It was then that I engaged with his mind directly, rendering him unable to defend himself. The desperation in his thoughts became palpable. He screamed internally, filled with fear as I methodically dismantled the seal that had confined a fragment of my own soul. In that moment, reclaiming another piece of my essence provided a surge of strength unlike anything I had felt in some time. With the recovery of 2 more portions of my soul, I found myself not only revitalized but also enriched with the knowledge and experience accumulated by the 2-tailed beasts, who had endured many battles since I was fragmented by my own son. As I pulled myself free from the depths of his mind, Roshi's expression was one of disbelief. His eyes widened as he took in the transformation that had just unfolded before him. "Just who in the world are you, kid?" he finally questioned, clearly shaken. I sensed the weight of the moment. "We're done with the introductions," I replied, finally revealing my true self. "I am the infernal flame that dances on the graves of my enemies." Quote. With both opponents incapacitated, and Onoki remaining silent and seemingly paralyzed by the unfolding events, I picked up a kunai from the ground. I approached Roshi deliberately, my intent clear. As I positioned the sharp blade against his throat, it finally dawned on Onoki that he needed to intervene to avoid further escalation. Wow, hold up. The fight is over. You don't need to go any further, you have already proven your skill without having to eliminate them. What intrigues me, however, is why these opponents are still unconscious and why I suddenly feel so different from when the battle first started. It's as if my chakra reserves have experienced a sudden surge, almost like they've been replenished in an instant. I cast a glance at Onoki and couldn't help but shake my head slightly in response to his observations. I mentioned earlier that anything they lost during the course of our battle becomes mine to keep. To put it simply, they won't be needing those seals anymore. As for my chakra, it's not entirely accurate to say it grew. Rather, it has been restored to a fraction of its original strength, something I hadn't anticipated. Onoki floated over to my side, his attention drawn to the two men still lying unconscious on the ground. It was clear now that they were suffering from a significant depletion of their chakra reserves. I can sense there is a deeper story behind your statement. Nevertheless, since you emerged victorious against these two, I'd say you are indeed qualified to be considered Junin material. Now, why don't you accompany me to my office? I can get you officially registered, hand you the village headband, and you can share that story with me while we discuss your future plans. Feeling a sense of generosity, I decided to share the truth with the Tsuchikage. It was crucial for him to trust me if I ever hoped to enlist his aid in recovering the 6 remaining pieces of my soul. As we made our way toward his office, his secretary unexpectedly tossed the headband in my direction. For some reason, she did not seem particularly pleased with me at that moment, which only added to the mystery of the situation. As I entered the room, I noticed Onoki gracefully floating towards his seat. He settled down with a calm demeanor, exuding an air of authority and wisdom. I took my own seat across from him, adopting a posture of patience as I awaited his comfort before we delved into our discussion. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions, and I wasted no time in addressing the elephant in the room. So, how is it that you can contain 3-tailed beasts? I began, my voice steady yet curious. Let's not dance around the truth. We attempted to kidnap Kushina Uzumaki precisely to acquire the 9 tails from Konoha. If that's the case, how is it possible for you, of all people, to harbor 3-tailed beasts within you? Our own Jinchuriki struggled significantly with just one. Before he could respond, I paused for a moment to gather my thoughts and glanced toward the inviting teapot that sat on his desk. Would it be too much trouble if I got myself some of that tea? I inquired, my curiosity piqued by its aroma. He nodded in approval, allowing me to pour myself a cup. As I lifted the cup to my nose and inhaled deeply, I was transported to memories of my wife lovingly preparing similar tea whenever I felt anxious. The warm scent wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. After taking a sip, I set the cup down and returned my focus to Onoki. He began to speak, and the gravity of his words demanded my full attention. You are mistaken in several of your assumptions, he stated with a hint of gravity. First and foremost, my age far exceeds what you might expect. I am the father of the very person you consider the sage of the 6 paths, as well as his brother. Regarding the claim that I contain 3-tailed beasts within me, that too is a misunderstanding. The truth is that I have reabsorbed 3 pieces of my own soul. His admission caught me off guard, and I leaned forward, captivated by the weight of his revelation. You see, he continued, my eldest son trapped my wife on what you refer to as the moon, and in a fit of rage, he severed me into 10 pieces. To you and your allies, those 9-tailed beasts are weapons birthed from the sage of the 6 paths, but the reality is much more complex. They are, in essence, fragments of my own soul. Each time I absorb one of these